This conference will now be recorded.
We'll call to order the Public Safety, Health, and Welfare Committee meeting of November 10th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Present are committee members Broussard, Williamson, and Limpert, as well as council members Schuman, Glassburn, Kelly, Heeman. The mayor is present, planning director, city engineer, law director, and guests. I hope I didn't miss any. I'm sorry, the HR director is also present, as well as Council President Jones. We're here tonight to discuss two pieces of legislation, Ordinance 2020-117. We'll start with that one, which reads, an ordinance amending Section 555.09 emergency exception of Chapter 555 noise control of the General Offenses Code of the codified ordinances of the city of North Olmsted to include emergency generators as an exception to the noise control standards and declaring an emergency. Who from the administration will be handling this one?
Mr. Chairman, I could do it.
Thank you, Mayor.
In the past, we've accepted generators under the section with the understanding that they would only run during emergencies. As storms have gotten worse and worse, we have gotten more and more applications for generators, so we wanted to clean up this section. We have increased the decimals, as it was pretty restrictive. It's 66 decimals, which is about the equivalency of a lawnmower. Generators need to be 27 feet away from the nearest point of the neighbor's dwelling. And newer generators are a lot quieter than they used to be. And this was discussed with the building commissioner, and these are his recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can't hear you.
Can you clarify that 66 decibel level? Is that the old standard or the new standard?
No, that's the new standard.
Okay, all right.
And again, typically these would only run during emergencies, power outages. The one gentleman that came in and talked to me about this before we reviewed it had a his wife is on an electric breathing machine, so he needed a generator, and so we decided to look at the code, and this is the recommendation from the building commissioner.
Okay. I honestly didn't have any other questions other than what you've already addressed in your brief explanation. So at this point, I'll open it up to committee members. Any questions or comments? Mr. Limpert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, was there a distance requirement?
I couldn't hear everything, but I believe you were talking about distance requirement. I think the distance requirement in the old section was to the person's property, not their dwelling.
Thank you.
And to clarify, Mayor, you indicated that that new distance is now 27 feet.
From the dwelling, yes.
From the dwelling, okay, all right.
And again, that's at the recommendation of the building commissioner who has to enforce this.
Understood, okay. Any other questions or comments from committee? From council? Ms. Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor, could you clarify for me, does the new language, if I'm reading it correctly, say that they're only to be used between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m.?
No, that's just to be tested. Apparently, you would test these each week.
Oh, okay. Yes, I thank you so much, because I thought that would not help a person with a breathing machine.
It's tough to figure out when an emergency is going to be.
I do understand they self-test because we've just approved a bunch in our HOA here. So yeah, the self-testing makes sense to me now. Thank you so much.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I'll make a motion to approve to all of council ordinance 2020-117 and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Williamson. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. That'll pass 3-0. Moving on to ordinance 2020-121. It's an ordinance dispensing with the formal RFP process and authorizing and directing the Director of Planning and Community Development to engage the services of Mott McDonald to undertake a road safety audit for portions of Berkshire Road and Porter Road for the purpose of investigating safety concerns presented to the council by the public and to make recommendations for roadway safety improvements and declaring an emergency. Before we begin with this, I just want to point out that after this piece of legislation was introduced, there's been a flurry of additional roadway concerns that have been brought to council's attention from other council members. But tonight we're just going to stick with the two that are on the actual ordinance, the language of the ordinance. And so after discussion, we can make a decision then to either hold it in committee to discuss the other ones that came in. And at my count, there was about 8 or 10 additional that came in above these two. And I just don't think that we've all had the time to digest all of those additional ones that came in kind of late in the game. And some of them were vague, to be honest. So again, at the end of this meeting, we'll make the decision to either hold this in committee so that we can consider the other items that were brought to our attention as part of this legislation, or we can make the decision to move forward or not forward with this legislation, and then those other pieces can be considered by a new piece of legislation. All right. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our engineer, Pete DeFranco, and let's start with Berkshire Drive if we could.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've looked at this curve many times over the past 10 to 15 years. There's already warning signage around the curve. There's also a street light as well as 2 pieces of guardrail. We've had 3 cars leave the roadway over the past 18 years, according to police reports. Most recently, last month, a car went off the roadway and hit the garage at 28710 Berkshire. So we took another look at this, and I prepared this sketch. We looked at several options, including that were suggested to us, including adding stop signs, a yield sign, rumble strips, even speed bumps. We kind of ruled all those out. The Ohio Manual of Traffic Control Devices doesn't recommend those in this specific situation. So what we did come up with is adding additional signage on the approach to this curve, coming from the south, heading north, an additional warning sign of the curve, as well as replacing an existing sign with another sign that advises the driver to slow down from 25 to 15 miles per hour. And let me state, these signs are advisory. They just give warning. They're not regulatory, so they can't be enforced or ticketed. We also contacted CEI to have them look at whether an additional street light can be added between the addresses of 28710 and 28716. There's an existing pole there, However, there are a lot of wires and equipment on that pole. So we're not sure if they'll be able to, but they are going to look at it. And then we are recommending adding a third chevron sign directly in front of the house that was hit, which is in direct line of sight of vehicles heading north on Berkshire. And this additional chevron sign would be solar powered and speed activated, so it can be set to start blinking if cars are exceeding the posted speed limit. And we felt that was important so that the lights wouldn't be flashing continuously, which could possibly be a disturbance to neighbors. And that completes my report.
Thank you, Pete. So I have a few questions before I open it up to committee and council. So I guess the first question I had, and you and I had a couple of emails where I asked and questions were asked and answered. But so the Ohio Manual of Traffic Control Devices, you made the comment that they don't recommend certain items, but that doesn't mean that they're prohibited. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess that would be true. However, it also recommends that traffic control devices be implemented based on the judgment of an engineer or an engineering study. And I would agree with their recommendations.
Okay. So I guess, and I'm not, you know, the old saying, I'm trying not to shoot the messenger. I know you're delivering facts and information. I have a little bit of a hard time not recommending or prohibiting things that in my mind were kind of common sense items, like rumble strips, not on the curve itself, but as you approach the curve, because as I indicated, you know, I think it's human nature. The minute your tires start going over rumble strips, your immediate reaction is to take your foot off the gas and apply it to the brake, and but most importantly, pay attention, pay closer attention. So I think that the reasoning that the main reasoning you gave me on not recommending rumble strips was because of bike traffic. So does that mean that there's been proven instances where rumble strips have proven to be a hazard to bicyclists?
Well, it's the example given in the Ohio Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I didn't research it beyond that.
Okay. And then I guess I wanted a clarification. You indicated that there would be a third chevron sign in your proposal or recommendation. You're suggesting a third chevron sign to be placed in front of 28710, and this would be solar powered and speed activated. I'm just wondering the rationale of in front of the house that keeps getting hit versus before the house. Can you kind of clarify that for me?
Yeah, my thought that it being directly in front of the travel lane would be most effective. It'd be, you know, people coming north on Berkshire, it'd be directly in front of them. It could be installed further south or in advance of the curve. That's another option.
Okay. Yeah, again, you know, I'm not an engineer, right? But I'm supposed to be a jack of all trades. So I just felt like I trying to put myself behind the wheel of vehicles coming northbound down Berkshire. And it just seems to me if there's going to be an illuminated sign, solar powered, that lights up upon speed activation, that it would want to warn me before I get to that curve instead of when I'm right on top of it. Agree? And it's okay
yeah.
if you don't.
No, I mean, I don't disagree. I guess I can see both ways.
Okay, all right. And then, so I guess it remains to be determined whether or not there would be a light by First Energy installed for additional illumination of the area. Any idea time-wise when that final decision might be made?
No, I don't. The request was submitted to CEI. It was sent to their engineering department, so it's in their hands.
Okay. At this time, I don't have any additional questions for Berkshire, so I'm going to open Berkshire up to committee. And with this exhibit on the screen, it's hard for me to see who might be raising their hand. So you might also want to give me a verbal as well. I do see Ms. Williamson, so we'll give the floor to Ms. Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for addressing some of those concerns that were brought out by this legislation. So I guess the basic question is, after getting the accident report from the police department, there have been 10 accidents over here since 2003. First, let me ask, when was the letter submitted to CEI or First Energy, and what is their normal response rate in returning that information to the city? Do we have any idea? I'm not holding anyone to it, but just a roundabout time frame.
I don't know. I don't remember the exact date. It's been about a week. And I don't have an estimated time frame. It's not a typical thing that we do often, requesting streetlights.
No, I understand that. So there have been a number of concerns made by some of the residents in this area about the lighting, the lack of warning signs for this curve. Should there be signs on the other side of Berkshire heading east and then going south? In addition, I mean, I'm not a safety expert. I'm not sure if any of us are, but has there been any consideration for the mirrors? I know I've seen those in some instances where they're put on sharp curves such as this. There's also those, the smaller posts with an arrow on it rather than these big ones where you can put, 3 in a row showing the curve. Have any of those signs been considered?
Well, I'm not sure if you're referring to these chevron signs are 3 in a row. I don't know what the alternative is that you're referring to.
I can get you a photo of that tomorrow
Okay.
to show you. They're small. They're a little bit smaller than this, but you can almost put them, in a row together. I've seen them on, in other municipalities that have curves such as this, that have something like that.
Okay. And no, I have not considered the mirrors. But I'm also not aware of any issues in the eastbound direction.
I've been told that when there's buses crossing each other, that curve is so tight that they're nearly colliding. You know, I've heard different scenarios with, you know, trucks versus car and taking the curve, you know, one way. People seem to go over into the middle of the street versus staying in their own lane. You know, I'm just looking at it from a collision aspect and from what the residents have informed me of.
And Ms. Williamson, does that kind of cover everything for the time being from your standpoint?
I mean, at this moment, yes, but I also want to know, you know, from a safety standpoint, have we had this reviewed by any safety officials that can attest to this being a good plan, or have they suggested other measures be made? Because I think the whole issue with this this ordinance was because we didn't have any of these items in place. It's become a safety concern that, you know, nothing's been done here. And, you know, I know that the vehicle going through the one home has only happened 2 times in 29 years, but the fact that it's happened at all is of concern. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You know, he hasn't raised his hand yet, but I am very interested in hearing Councilman Limpert's perspective, since he has a firsthand knowledge, having grown up literally almost on that bend. And if you're willing to share kind of your perspective and any questions or comments you might have, that'd be welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chair, and as I think the disclaimer has been said there, so you can take my opinion for what it is, which is having lived nearby. So, you know, there has been an evolution of this with those additional guardrails. There, I would agree with Councilwoman Williamson that heading east, it does appear to be a tight curve to turn right there. And I would also note that there are some trees from the tree lawn heading south on the right-hand side, which is why I think Mr. DeFranco was recommending the signs to be more straight ahead as opposed to on the right-hand side. So those are just my observations. I'm not going to comment on rumble strips. Sounds like there's been people with far more expertise of how they work, you know, weighing in on this of whether those would be useful or not at a curb. So those are my general comments. Hopefully that adds some commentary to what Ms. Williamson noted and what the engineer commented on.
Thank you, Mr. Limpert. Are there any questions or comments? There we go. Now I can see you all better. So the first hand I saw is Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only concern about rumble strips would be is they're noisy, and cars going over that at whatever hours they might be driving over them, I'm sure would be quite annoying to the residents there, especially in the summertime when windows are open. But if you've gone down any streets that have rumble strips, you can definitely hear it from a distance as they're crossed. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you want to, after this, entertain larger questions about these issues, or just only after the next item in the legislation?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
So we're talking about one of these instances, and I understand we're not going to get into the details of the 10 or so other items or which vendor we're going to use, but there are some larger questions about solving these safety issues in general. So I'd like to weigh in on that at the appropriate time on just this question in specific. I guess my question, having lived on the other side of town my whole time in North Olmsted, is part of the problem of this specific street that it is a downward decline as you're coming from Lorraine, and so it's a little bit of a launching pad. Is the solution earlier so that by the time people are coming down to this, they're not having gone down the hill and launched themselves?
I will ask Mr. DeFranco to comment on your question. I understand the question and I appreciate it.
Yeah, one thought is this is being used as a cut through, but there is also a stop sign at the midpoint at Alden, so that stops the cars midway between Lorraine and North Park. And I took a quick look at the overall map, and there's probably 50 other locations throughout the city that have a 90-degree right turn like this. So it's not uncommon.
So yeah, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that comment, Pete, but so the 50 or so other sharp turns, are any of them known hazards that you're aware of without having looked into it deeper?
No.
No, no, they're not hazards in your opinion?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Okay, so back to Councilman Glassburn's question. I think this evening I just want to focus on the two issues at hand. I do understand your question though about the broader scope of roadway safety in general in the city of North Olmsted, and I think that is another discussion for another day for sure. So, Councilwoman Heeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, you know, that I'm looking at the picture, there's a guardrail, and I understand, is there one or two guardrails at this location? May I ask Mr. DeFranco directly?
2 guardrails.
Okay, and have those been paid for by the city completely, or was it a resident contribution for any of that?
Those were installed before I became city engineer, so I don't know.
And so our current policy is what?
The Ohio Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices does not consider guardrails as traffic control devices. They are hazardous, so they caution against using them to protect objects that are less hazardous than the guardrail itself.
But would the city install one, or we don't pay to do that?
I do not recommend installing guardrails to stop vehicles, no.
My question is, who pays for them if they're installed?
On private property, it would be by the resident.
Thank you.
But if I can jump in, that the tree lawn isn't it basically considered city property that's maintained? And so if those two guardrails were previously installed, it was likely by the city and at the city's expense. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a lot of hands going up. I'm going to allow a follow-up from Ms. Heeman, then we'll go Mr. Glassburn, then Ms. Williamson.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. And it's just a statement, not a question. And sadly, you know, you don't want to address all of the other areas of concern. But I have, maybe not over the number of years, as many accidents, but certainly a fire hydrant, a truck, and a house that has 4 young children that can't have any of these things. So I know you don't want to talk about that right now, but it's a very big concern, and I hope you'll consider it in this piece and not let some of them wait. Thank you.
As I indicated, we'll keep an open mind for a broader discussion moving forward. So next in order, Mr. Glassburn, do you still have a question or comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep this as narrow as I can. So Mr. DeFranco indicated that he does not recommend guardrails more or less in any circumstance, it sounded like. So again, without expanding this too broadly, where we have situations, whether it's here Berkshire or a resident of mine on Clegg that's had a car in their house 3 times in the last 10 years, if it's not guardrails, what are you recommending that stops vehicles from killing residents? Thank you.
The floor is yours, Pete.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to be, trying to choose my words correct or nicely, but people need to follow the laws, obey the speed limit, not text while driving. Signs do not solve the problem. Whatever improvements we make here, by adding signs, shouldn't give residents the false sense of security that it's going to stop someone who's speeding or not paying attention. But it's not the purpose of, it's not our purpose to install guardrails to keep cars on the road or to stop cars from straying.
I have a follow-up comment, but I'm going to wait for Ms. Williams, and I think she still had something she wanted to say.
Oh, now I have lots of things to say. Thank you. As far as the guardrails on Berkshire, I was informed by the residents, and I don't know if someone can confirm this, but the Ohio Department of Public Safety had something to do with assessing that area and had suggested the guardrails, and I don't know if anyone can actually check into that. But as far as the other issues, I mean, the whole purpose of this ordinance was to employ the services of someone to do a safety assessment. And while I do believe our city engineer is very capable, I would like to see us go outside for other suggestions or alternatives. We can't stop cars from speeding. And unfortunately, these residents' homes are in the line of fire. And they have nothing to do with this, but now they have a car in their house or through their garage, or God forbid their children or someone's outside and ends up getting hit by these cars. But we can't take a sit back approach and expect drivers to be safe. It's we don't have police on every corner out there trying to stop things from happening. So in light of that, I think we should proceed with a company that can provide alternative suggestions to what we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williamson. Ms. Heeman, if you could make it quick, we're going to move on to Barton or Porter Road. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I will be brief. I don't know. I guess my question about Ms. Williamson's comment is, we've got a very good city engineer. I don't know that another, paying someone would give us better answers, right? And I'm curious if Law Director Garreau might have some comment or statement with regard to, the traffic fines, the violations, anything like that, because clearly it's a driver problem, not, a sign problem or a guardrail problem, I guess is the thing. So I don't know that there's better answers out there, but maybe that's an avenue to look at. Thank you.
Mr. Grill.
Thank you. Councilwoman, if they come to our office, we prosecute them. So if they come our way, we'll take care of them and put them through the process as best we can. The issue of fines and whatnot, we dealt with that really throughout the city. We have Michael Gordillo, our prosecutor, I think does an exemplary job. If somebody's ticketed, we're gonna treat it that way. If you wanted to increase fines for speeding, you could do so. If you wanted to change, some cities, have made traffic tickets first-degree misdemeanors instead of minor misdemeanors. I don't recommend that, but like the taking trucks on the side streets a while ago, that issue that we were dealing with over by Ganley, we looked at whether we should increase the penalties, and we already did. There's always things you guys can do like that. But still, right now, we still treat these types of tickets, if it's failure to control where they crash, or if it's a distracted driving, if it's a speed, if we can prove speed on a crash scene, there's still $150 fines and 2 points on your driver's license. So we'll be happy to prosecute them if they're caught and send them our way, and we'll keep doing what we're doing. You have options if you wanted to increase penalties, but just remember that you're kind of targeting one or two specific neighborhoods, and when you up the penalties for some of these violations, it's going to have a very, very wide spray, and it's going to hit a lot of behavior. So whatever the council sees fit to do, I'll be happy to do it.
Thank you, Law Director. So a couple of closing comments from myself before we move on to Porter Road. So, and they're really, I think, just questions. So how was the services of Mott MacDonald chosen as the entity? And before we answer that, I want to know, are they kind of the same thinking? Are they simply relying on the Ohio Manual of Traffic Control Devices on what's recommended and what's not recommended? And are there other entities out there that are available and perhaps think a little bit outside that box? I'm not saying that it's wrong to think within that scope, but sometimes the answer of, well, that's just how we've always done it, doesn't cut it. So,
thank you. I can address part of that. Mott MacDonald was selected. I received a legislative request from Councilwoman Williamson to proceed in this direction. This is a little bit of a different ordinance. Usually these are initiated by the administration and it goes the opposite direction. So this was a directive from a member of council, and council directing a member of the administration to take action. We don't typically get those. So in this instance, they're permitted, but in this instance, it took a little bit of creativity to try to figure out how to do that, because normally we'd have to do an RFP. There might be some appropriation issues, things that the administration would normally be on top of before the legislation rolled out, or they'd have some concepts. So Mott MacDonald was suggested by me because I know that they are very familiar with North Olmsted. I know that they're doing a safety study on the other end of town. We are familiar with them. That's where that came from. You could do an RFP and go out and look for any engineer you want and set up the whole RFP process. But I didn't, but I did speak to Director Lieber about, since this was directed toward this legislation is requiring her to do certain things. So I did speak with her first about what we thought might be the most productive way to do it, and satisfy the councilwoman's request that we do something. So I see her hands up, so I'll quit talking.
Director Lieber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the law director brought this issue to my attention, and I did reach out to Mott MacDonald to ask what type of approach they would take for a project of this nature. And I think, Mr. Chair, it sounds a lot like what you're suggesting, taking a different approach at looking at an existing project. They said, you know, what they would probably recommend is forming a small team across different disciplines, whether it be, you know, police, council members, engineering, residents in the area of the study, and conducting open sessions at the site where the group is out and kind of actively brainstorming just what they see, taking pictures, making notes, and kind of collaborating as a group. And then taking that team's suggestions and ideas and submitting it to the engineer then for their analysis and for their study of those options. So you kind of get the best blend of the locals that kind of know, you know, the tricky spots or what it feels like to travel through the area, but also their engineering expertise. So I know that after I contacted them to ask about what kind of approach, I know that they've already, you know, been out and driven through the area and, you know, had a bunch of different observations that I thought were useful and that the city engineer and I discussed as well in some of his formulation of recommendations. So if it's council's pleasure to go this route, I do think that their approach seemed appropriate for including different voices in the process.
All right. Thank you for that input. I appreciate it. We're going to move on to the Porter Road issue, but you know, before we do, I just want to circle back again at the top of the meeting. I had a feeling that Berkshire was going to evolve into a broader scope, and so I think the Porter Road discussion will end up being significantly shorter in duration than what we've just discussed with regard to Berkshire, but for similar reasons. And then I think after that, we can make a decision whether to hold it or move forward with the legislation. So that said, Mr. DeFranco, if you can kind of just give us an overview, walk us through what you're recommending for Porter Road. Before you do that, I just want to give everybody an overview. Those of you who've been on council for any period of time will know that we've had a couple of residents on Porter Road who are regulars at our in-person meetings when we were doing in-person council meetings, where cars are ending up on their front lawn where their children play. And to this day, my personal opinion, I cannot understand for the life of me how that is occurring, because the bend is not that sharp, but that doesn't discount the fact that it is occurring on a regular basis. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, again, we've looked at this curve several times over the years. The police reports show 11 cars have left the road over the past 19 years, and most of them are on the outside of the curve. And I believe the feedback is coming from a resident on the inside of the curve. So yeah, I haven't been able to figure that one out either. You know, I did review the geometry of the curve. It's well within engineering standards for that speed limit. In 2016, we tried to install chevrons along the outside of the curve, and those residents actually, or one resident in particular, didn't want signs in his yard, so he removed them. So my recommendation is to just add an additional curve ahead sign in each direction. So there's currently one curve ahead in each direction. I would recommend adding another just to make it stick out a little more. And I thought about doing another solar powered sign, but I think due to the volume of traffic on Porter, I think it would lose its effect because it would be on constantly. That concludes my report.
Okay. So, yeah, you referenced the Chevron signs in 2016. I can't even begin to tell you how disappointing that was, shamelessly by one resident in particular who removed them because his wife did not like the aesthetics of the signage in their tree lawn area. That said, you know, do you feel like Chevron signs are more effective than curve ahead signs? Because, you know, we shouldn't have the opinion of one resident's aesthetic opinion dictating what signs we put up or don't put up.
Yes, I think they would help.
Okay. So you think Chevron instead of curve ahead or in addition to?
I guess I would recommend the chevrons first.
Okay. And then did you make any recommendations with regard to lighting? You know, how the lighting exists today and any recommendations over and above that?
I felt the lighting was fine. There's 4 lights, one on every other pole, and you know, at the beginning, middle, and end of the curve. So I felt it was lit properly.
Okay. So I've got a comment, and then we'll open it back up to committee. So I personally am, at least on Porter Road, I'm in disagreement about a guardrail. I've always felt like a guardrail, you know, I don't really care what the Ohio Manual of Traffic Control Devices says about guardrails. If it keeps cars out of front lawns and potentially running over kids playing in their large front yard, because the front yards on Porter in a lot of cases are actually bigger than the backyard. So that's where you're going to find a lot of kids playing. So I personally don't have a problem with installing a guardrail on or near the 4500 address of Porter, which is where the significant amount of occurrences have taken place with cars leaving the roadway, from what I've been told by previous police chief. So does anybody have an opinion on that from the administration? Mayor?
Thank you, Councilman Broussard. Yeah, I too have traveled that road many a times looking for this dangerous curve, and it's beyond me why this keeps happening. But we do want to help out the residents for sure, and I would tend to stick to the opinion of my engineer, but I'm more than happy to discuss anything we can do to help out the resident.
Okay. Any questions or comments from committee? Mr. Limpert, then Ms. Williamson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think just these 2 examples, it was good just to limit to this. And as you can see, even from 2 examples, there's a lot of art to these, as the science has already been sort of broken, right? But by the way these are current, that the standard methodology has already shown that there's still an issue despite what the guidelines are. You know, I think unfortunately some of these things just come down to aesthetics and sort of optical frame of reference of the drivers as it relates to these areas. So I do think that the engineer has looked at this in a holistic way, and any way we can think about this from broader than just you know, just the limited factors that the engineers look at, like you said, having the safety feedback as well from police, and then even some residential feedback who live there on a regular basis is always beneficial on these.
All right, thank you. Ms. Williamson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my final question is this. I know that we've had extensive conversation with this area as well. and again, based on the safety report that we received, 84 accidents in this area since 2002. But why is it taking this meeting to happen, or this legislation to come up, before any consideration was taken to adding signs or any other kind of safety measures around these areas when we've been aware of them for so long?
Are you directing that?
I'm just
is that
asking.
a rhetorical?
It could be, unless someone wants to answer it, but I'm fine with it just being as it is, because it kind of says it on its own anyway. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll be more than happy to answer that. We did add signs to the port. Are you talking about the Porter Road?
I'm talking about both areas.
Oh,
So
well, we are talking about Porter, though.
Yeah, well, we did add signs to Porter.
he's asking a question and I'm answering with what areas I was referring to. I mean, this is all, to me, it's all encompassing of each other.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions from or comments from council? I see Mr. Schuman first, then Mr. Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete, are all these accidents happening at night? Are all these off the road incidents, are these all happening at night?
I haven't analyzed that.
I'd be really curious to hear that. I mean, I get what you're saying about you think there's enough light there, but and even like with the thing about guardrails, if you put up a guardrail, you can put chevrons on the guardrail too. I mean, are there chevrons, are there signs on the guardrails that are already up on Berkshire? And I'm sorry to drag that back up, Mr. Broussard, but it just seems like that's, a pertinent question here. I mean, if we insist upon putting up a guardrail, it seems like you take advantage of the guardrail, you put a bunch of chevrons on it so people can see it when they're coming down the road. Just
Yep, Mr. Chair.
that's fine. I'll drop it.
Okay.
There are, Mr. Chair, there are chevrons on that guardrail and red and white striping.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Glassburn, do you sit? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, so on this point, narrowly, but I mean this broadly as well, whether it's Porter or any of these roads, if the situation is that cars are consistently not just turfing and it 6 inches or so, but going clearly into yards or going clearly into houses, I share the chairman's viewpoint of I don't care what the manual says. If it's going to save a life, I'm happy to put up a guardrail. It's that simple. Wherever it happens to be in the city. There was a secondary, and I promise I'm not going to go too far on this. There was a secondary one that I submitted in this list where it isn't a lethal concern, but because we haven't done anything on this curve, the residents have taken it upon themselves to put giant rocks at the edge of their driveway. And so when people drive that 6 inches off, they're destroying their cars because we haven't provided a better solution than the residents taking it upon themselves. So I don't want to see residents on Porter or anywhere else, erecting stone walls of barriers to destroy cars. But we can't have cars going through homes and lawns like this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Welcome. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay. So I think you probably know where this is headed. I'm going to make a recommendation to hold this in committee so that we can digest everything that we just talked about, but just as importantly, to also consider the additional instances that were brought to our attention over the course of the last couple of days via email, so that if we ultimately end up deciding to do a formal traffic study, let's kind of get the most bang for our buck and encompass all those areas that are of concern and not just these two. Ms. Williamson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible to get a list of these addresses rather than having all of the multiple emails? Because I'm afraid I may have missed one or two.
Yeah, it's a good point. It was hard to sift through. They were coming in fast and furious. So we can have the council clerk, if he doesn't mind, putting together a summary list and sending that to not only all of council, but to the administration as well. So with that said, I'm going to make that motion to hold 2020-121 in committee and ask for a second.
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 All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 3-0, and we will conclude our meeting at our safety committee meeting at 7:56 p.m.